"Move it, Megan." Sarah's voice pierced through the noise of sizzling oil and clinking trays. Megan, sweat dripping down her temple, grabbed the next order and hurried to the counter. The lunch rush at fast food was in full swing, with impatient customers tapping their feet and parents trying to calm their crying kids. The chaos was overwhelming, but it was Megan's everyday reality. "Next, please," Megan called out, putting on her practice smile as a teenager with headphones stepped forward. As she handed over the tray of burgers and fries, she caught sight of a figure standing near the menu display. An older man, thin and frail, was scanning the board as if searching for something that he couldn't quite afford. His clothes were wrinkled, and his hands trembled slightly. Megan's stomach knotted. She recognized that kind of hunger. It was a look she had seen before, one of desperation and silent shame. As the line of customers grew, she kept glancing over, her concern deepening. The man's gaze drifted, lingering on the menu items he clearly couldn't pay for. He clutched a small, crumpled wallet, looking defeated. The crowd surged forward, demanding attention, but Megan couldn't ignore him. 1 second, she muttered to the customer, who rolled his eyes in irritation. Megan stepped back to the register and pulled out a few crumpled bills from her own pocket. She walked up to the older man, trying to keep her voice casual. "Sir, what would you like today?" she asked gently. The man looked up, startled, and met her eyes with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. I can't afford much," he mumbled. Megan smiled and gestured to the menu. "Anything you want," she said. His eyes widened, and for a brief moment, the lines of worry on his face softened. "A simple burger will do." "Thank you. God bless you," he whispered, his voice cracking. Megan quickly processed the order and handed him the meal. She felt a small glow of warmth, a sense of doing something right in a day full of mechanical motions and empty smiles. But just as the old man took his first grateful bite, a shadow loomed over her. "Megan!" Sarah's voice was sharp and cold. Megan turned around, her heart dropping. Sarah's arms were crossed, her face flushed with anger. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. "I was just helping," Megan began, but Sarah cut her off, her voice rising above the din. "You think fast food is a charity? You think you can just give food away? You broke company policy. We don't give handouts, especially on company time." Megan's face burned as customers started to look over, sensing the brewing confrontation. The old man, now silent, tried to fade into the background, clutching his burger as if it might be ripped from his hands. "I'll pay for it myself," Megan insisted, trying to control the tremble in her voice. But Sarah was unmoved. "It doesn't matter," she snapped. "Rules are rules. You're done here. Pack your things. You're fired." The words hit Megan like a punch to the gut. Fired. The humiliation flooded her senses as the reality sank in. Her job, her only source of income, gone in a flash over a simple act of kindness. Her throat closed, but she forced herself to stand tall, even as tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. Megan turned to leave, her mind spinning. Customers whispered, and her colleagues exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared to intervene. Her act of kindness had cost her everything, and she felt the crushing weight of that decision as she pushed open the doors and stepped into the harsh sunlight, jobless and defeated. Megan's steps felt heavier with each passing moment, as if the world had shifted, and she was now carrying the full weight of her choices. The fast-paced city life roared around her, oblivious to the storm brewing inside her. Fired. The word echoed in her mind, sharp and unforgiving. It hadn't been just a job. It was the fragile thread keeping her afloat in an unforgiving world. She found herself walking without direction, her feet guiding her to a small park a few blocks away from fast food. It was a place she used to visit as a kid, a quiet spot where she could gather her thoughts. She sank onto a worn wooden bench and buried her face in her hands, trying to breathe, to think, to feel something other than the crushing mix of shame and fear. Rent was due in 2 weeks. Her credit card bills, already a looming threat, would now become an insurmountable mountain. She had no savings, no safety net, and no family to turn to. Her parents had passed years ago, and she had no siblings. It was just her against the world. and for the first time in a long while, she didn't know how she was going to make it. She took a shaky breath and pulled out her phone, staring at it with dread. She knew she had to call Emma, her roommate and best friend, but the thought of confessing her failure felt too heavy. Emma had always been the practical one, the steady anchor to Megan's occasional impulsivity. The words, "I lost my job," formed in her mind like a confession she wasn't ready to voice. "Megan," a voice interrupted her spiraling thoughts. She looked up, surprised to see one of her co-workers, Daniel, approaching. He was still in his fast food uniform, his hands stuffed into his pockets, looking awkward and unsure. "Hey," he said softly, sitting down beside her. I saw what happened. It wasn't fair." His words were a small balm to the raw wound inside her, but they didn't erase the reality of her situation. Megan managed a weak smile, but it crumbled almost immediately. "It's not about fair," she replied, her voice tight. "I broke the rules, Daniel. I shouldn't have expected anything else." She hated how hollow she sounded, how accepting she had become of life's harshness. Daniel sighed, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe, but you did something good. You helped someone who needed it. That should count for something." He hesitated, his fingers fidgeting. "Look, if you need anything, money, help finding another job, I'm here." Megan's chest ached at his kindness. She appreciated the offer, but the pride she had left refused to let her accept it. "Thanks," she said, her voice a whisper. "I'll figure something out." They sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the park around them filling the empty spaces between words. Daniel eventually stood, giving her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Take care of yourself, Megan. You deserve better." And with that, he walked back into the chaos of his shift, leaving her to face the storm alone. Megan closed her eyes and leaned back against the bench, her mind racing. She had always believed in small acts of kindness, the quiet good that could ripple out into the world. But now, the cost felt overwhelming. Her kindness had left her vulnerable, exposed in a world that valued rules and profits over compassion. Her phone buzzed in her lap, and she flinched, the sudden noise jolting her back to reality. It was a notification from a job search app, reminding her of the applications she had been putting off for weeks. With a sigh, she swiped it away. The idea of starting over, of reapplying, felt insurmountable, but she knew she had no choice. As she sat there, Megan couldn't shake the image of the old man's grateful eyes, the way his hands had stopped trembling when she handed him that simple meal. It hadn't been for nothing, she told herself. Even if it hurt now, even if it felt like the world was punishing her for being kind, it had to mean something. It had to. Megan stared at the rippling surface of the park's pond, lost in the endless, restless motion of the water. The gentle breeze barely reached her, but she could feel its chill settle deep within her bones. The world kept moving, indifferent to the disaster that had just unfolded in her life. It almost felt cruel, how everything around her remained unchanged while she had lost so much in a single afternoon. Her mind flashed back to when she was a child, playing on this very stretch of grass, dreaming of the endless possibilities life had in store. Her parents had always encouraged her dreams, telling her that she was capable of changing the world in her own small ways. They'd been her biggest champions, and their absence now felt like an old wound, freshly opened. Her phone buzzed again, breaking her reverie. This time she couldn't ignore it. Megan reluctantly picked it up and saw Emma's name lighting up the screen. She drew a steadying breath and answered, bracing herself. "Hey." Megan tried to sound normal, but the crack in her voice betrayed her. "Megs? What's wrong?" Emma's voice was instantly alert, the concern palpable. Megan closed her eyes, the shame washing over her. She could picture her friend in their small shared apartment, likely sitting at the kitchen table they'd bought secondhand, now worrying over Megan's silence. I lost my job," Megan finally admitted, her voice small. The words felt even heavier now that they were spoken, a reality she couldn't take back. There was a pause on the line, and Megan could almost hear Emma's mind racing. "Oh, Megs, I'm so sorry. What happened?" Megan hesitated, debating how much to share. She settled on the truth, painful as it was. "I paid for a burger for someone who couldn't afford it. Sarah saw, and she fired me. Right there, in front of everyone, Emma let out a sharp exhale. That's ridiculous. You were just being a decent human being. How can they treat you like that? Her indignation was a small comfort, a reminder that not everyone was as cold as Sarah. Megan forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow even to her. Well, being decent doesn't pay the rent. I don't know what I'm going to do, Em. Emma's voice softened. We'll figure it out. You're not alone in this. We'll tighten the budget, and you'll find something new. You always land on your feet. Megan wished she could share her friend's optimism, but the fear still loomed. Thanks, she whispered, the tears she'd been holding back threatening to spill. She couldn't cry, not here, not in front of strangers in a public park. I'll be home soon. We can talk more then. Take your time, Emma said gently. And Megan, you did the right thing. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. As the call ended, Megan felt both lighter and heavier. The love and support from Emma were a balm, but it didn't change the uncertainty of her future. She slipped her phone back into her bag, her hands trembling slightly. The reality of her situation was undeniable. Her savings, barely enough to last a month, would run out fast. The prospects of finding a new job, with competition fierce and rent looming, felt daunting. But beneath the fear, a stubborn spark of defiance began to grow. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe Megan wasn't meant to fit into a world that prioritized rules over kindness. Maybe she could find a place where her actions mattered. Megan wiped her eyes, the heaviness in her chest beginning to lift, if only a fraction. She stood up, gripping her bag as if it could ground her in the chaos. The park was still, the gentle rustling of leaves her only company. One step at a time, she told herself. The fight wasn't over yet. Megan walked slowly back toward her apartment, her feet dragging with exhaustion that wasn't purely physical. Her thoughts replayed the scene at fast food in an endless loop, her mind dissecting each moment. Sarah's fury, the whispers of customers, the disbelief that had left her paralyzed. The fear of what lay ahead wrapped itself around her like a heavy shroud. She was nearing her street when she noticed a figure sitting on the curb, hunched over and almost blending into the shadows of the late afternoon. As she drew closer, recognition struck her. It was the same old man she had helped earlier, the one whose gratitude had sparked the chain of events that had cost her everything. His hands, still trembling slightly, cradled the half-eaten burger Megan had bought for him. His eyes, weary and heavy with the weight of countless struggles, met hers, and he managed a weak, grateful smile. You again, he murmured, his voice rasping with age and fatigue. Didn't think I'd run into you twice in one day. Megan's heart twisted at the sight of him. Even after everything she had lost, she didn't regret helping him. She crouched down beside him, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. Hey, she said softly. Are you okay? He nodded, but it was unconvincing. Better than I was, thanks to you, he replied, his voice thick with emotion. He took another small bite of the burger, chewing slowly, as if savoring each morsel. I didn't get a chance to say it properly before. Thank you. What you did, it meant more than you'll ever know. Megan swallowed hard, the ache in her chest deepening. It was nothing, she said, though they both knew it wasn't. Everyone deserves a little kindness. The old man's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Kindness, he echoed almost to himself. Rare thing these days. He paused, studying her with an intensity that made her feel both exposed and understood. But you, what about you, miss? You look like you've had the world dropped on your shoulders. Megan let out a humorless laugh. Something like that. I got fired for helping you, she admitted, the words tasting bitter. And now I don't know what I'm going to do. Rent's due soon, and jobs aren't easy to come by. The man's face fell, and he shook his head slowly. I'm so sorry, he said, genuine guilt shadowing his features. I never meant to cause you trouble. All I wanted was a moment of feeling human again. Her heart clenched, and she reached out, touching his shoulder gently. Don't apologize. It's not your fault. You deserve that meal, and I'd do it again if I had to. For a moment, they sat there in shared silence, two souls brought together by circumstances neither could have foreseen. The world rushed on around them, cars passing, People walking, life continuing obliviously. But for that brief moment, there was an unspoken understanding between them. The man took a shuddering breath and seemed to gather himself. "I don't have much," he said, fumbling with something in his pocket. He pulled out a small, worn token, barely bigger than a coin, and pressed it into her hand. It was etched with an emblem she didn't recognize, but the weight of it felt significant. Megan looked at it, confused. "What's this?" He smiled faintly. "A piece of my past," he said cryptically. "Maybe it'll bring you luck, or at least remind you that good things come back around. Even if it takes time." His voice softened. "The world needs more people like you." Megan felt the sting of tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed all day. She wanted to believe him, wanted to hold on to the hope that her kindness would mean something, that it wasn't all for nothing. She closed her hand around the token, holding it close as if it could ward off the darkness creeping into her life. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. The man gave her a nod, his eyes gentle, yet burdened with the wisdom of years. They parted ways, Megan carrying the small token as a reminder that, even in a world that seemed unforgiving, there were moments that shone with quiet, undeniable meaning. Megan finally made it back to her apartment, her legs heavy and her mind clouded with exhaustion and uncertainty. She stepped into the small space she shared with Emma, the familiar smell of leftover coffee and the faint scent of lavender air freshener doing little to ease her turmoil. The walls, adorned with photos and cheap decor they had scavenged from thrift shops, felt like they were closing in. Emma was already there, sitting cross-legged on the couch with her laptop open and a pile of papers scattered around her. Her gaze snapped up when she heard the door, and she instantly set everything aside. Concern etched deep lines across her face. Megan managed a weak smile, closing the door behind her. "I'm home," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Emma rose from the couch, her eyes scanning Megan for signs of what had happened. "God, you look exhausted," she said, her voice a mix of worry and relief. She reached out, pulling Megan into a tight hug. For a moment, Megan let herself sink into the embrace, drawing strength from her friend's unwavering support. "I saw him again," Megan murmured against Emma's shoulder. Emma pulled back slightly, brows furrowed. "Who?" "The old man," Megan explained, holding out the small token he had given her. The emblem gleamed faintly in the dim light, and Emma took it with a curious expression. "I ran into him on the way home. He gave me this and said it might bring me luck." Emma studied the token, her lips pressing into a thin line. "What is this, a lucky charm?" she asked, her skepticism evident. But there was something in her tone, a flicker of hope she was trying to suppress. Megan shrugged, sinking into the worn armchair across from the couch. "I don't know, but he was so grateful, Emma. He made me feel like what I did mattered, even if it cost me my job." The reality of her situation settled back over her, a crushing weight she had only managed to ignore for a brief moment. Emma set the token down gently on the coffee table, then knelt in front of Megan, her eyes serious. "It did matter," she said firmly, "but we need to think about what comes next. You're not alone in this, okay? We'll figure it out together." Megan's throat tightened, and she struggled to find words. "I don't want to drag you down with me," she whispered. "You've already done so much, and I can't." Emma cut her off, her voice filled with an intensity that left no room for argument. "Stop. You're my best friend. We've been through worse together, and we'll get through this too." She grabbed Megan's hands, squeezing them tightly. "Besides, you're the one who always told me that good things come from small acts of kindness. Maybe it's time to believe that for yourself." Megan's eyes stung, and she bit her lip, fighting back the emotion threatening to spill over. "I want to believe that," she admitted. "But right now, it just feels like I'm paying a price I can't afford." Emma let go of her hands and leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Then let's find a way to make it work," she said. "First, we'll update your resume. I have a few contacts who might know of some openings. We'll start applying tonight." Megan nodded, feeling a flicker of hope reignite. Emma's determination was contagious, a reminder that she wasn't facing this alone. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. I don't know what I'd do without you. Emma offered a small smile. You'll never have to find out. The two friends sat there in the small, cluttered apartment, united by an unbreakable bond. Megan picked up the token from the table, running her thumb over the worn surface. It felt like a promise, a whispered reassurance that maybe, just maybe, things could turn around. She wasn't sure she believed it yet, but in that moment, sitting with Emma, she felt something she hadn't in hours, the faintest glimmer of hope. Later that evening, Megan sat cross-legged on the floor, her laptop propped up on the coffee table. The cursor blinked mockingly on a blank resume template, each pulse a reminder of the uncertain path ahead. Emma had gone into the kitchen to make some tea, leaving Megan with a few moments of silence to gather her thoughts, or at least to attempt to. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. Where did she even start? Fast food had been her main job for over a year, and though it paid the bills, it hardly felt like something to be proud of. She stared at the section labeled skills and felt an overwhelming sense of inadequacy. Sure, she could work a register and handle the stress of the lunch rush, but none of that felt important or unique. The sound of clinking mugs pulled her out of her spiral. Emma returned, placing a steaming cup of chamomile tea beside her. "Drink up," Emma said, her voice gentle. "You need to calm down a bit. No use in stressing before we even send out a single application." Megan gave a small nod, wrapping her hands around the mug and savoring its warmth. "Thanks," she murmured, grateful for Emma's calming presence. Taking a sip, she closed her eyes, letting the soothing liquid ease the tension coiled in her chest. Emma settled down beside her, glancing at the screen. "Okay, let's start with what you're good at," she said, her voice taking on a practical tone. "You're amazing with people, Megs. You connect with them. You care. Put that down." Megan frowned, doubt flickering in her eyes. "I don't think being nice is going to land me a job, Em." Emma shot her a look. "It's more than being nice. You handle difficult situations with empathy. Remember that time the family came in and their little girl was having a meltdown? You managed to calm her down and make the parents smile. That's a skill, Megan. You understand people." Megan's mind drifted to that memory. The little girl had been so upset, and she had kneeled down to her level, offering her a small paper crown and a smile. It had seemed like such a small gesture at the time, but the parents had been so grateful. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe those moments mattered more than she realized. "Okay," she conceded, typing out a description that tried to capture her ability to handle high-pressure situations with empathy and care. As the words filled the screen, she felt a bit of the heaviness lift, as though she was reclaiming some small part of herself. They worked on the resume together, with Emma offering suggestions and Megan finding ways to frame her experience in a better light. Time slipped by, and for the first time that day, Megan felt a semblance of control returning. The task wasn't easy, but it felt productive, purposeful. When they finished, Megan leaned back with a tired smile. "It's not perfect, but it's something," she said, her voice tinged with a fragile hope. Emma gave her a playful nudge. "See? Told you. We'll start sending this out tomorrow. First thing." She paused, her eyes softening. "And even if it takes a while, we'll figure something out. One step at a time." Megan's heart swelled with gratitude. "I don't deserve you," she said, her voice cracking. But Emma only laughed, shaking her head. "Too bad. You're stuck with me," she replied, the teasing warmth breaking through the darkness that had threatened to suffocate them both. The two friends shared a moment of quiet connection, the strength of their bond unspoken but deeply felt. As the night deepened, Megan found herself clutching the small token the old man had given her. It lay cool and heavy in her palm, a symbol of something she couldn't quite name. Maybe it wasn't just luck she needed, but the belief that things could get better, that all the acts of kindness, no matter how small, held power in a world so often harsh and unyielding. She held on to that thought as she drifted off to sleep later, the laptop closed and her heart, though bruised, still beating with the faint rhythm of hope. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting soft patterns across the living room. Megan awoke on the couch, the laptop still resting on the coffee table, its screen now dark. She stretched, feeling the ache in her back from a restless night. Despite her best efforts to calm her mind, the uncertainty of what lay ahead had gnawed at her dreams. Emma was already up, bustling quietly around the small kitchen. The smell of freshly brewed coffee drifted into the living room, and Megan took a moment to appreciate the small comforts that Emma brought into her life. Pushing herself upright, she rubbed her eyes and tried to shake off the last remnants of sleep. "Morning, sleepyhead," Emma greeted, a smile softening the tired lines on her face. She placed a mug of coffee on the table in front of Megan. "I figured we could use some fuel before the job hunt." Megan managed a grateful smile. "You're a lifesaver." She took a sip, letting the warmth spread through her. And for a moment, she felt almost normal. But reality crashed back in as she thought about the daunting day ahead. Applications, rejections, the unknown. Emma must have noticed the shadow crossing her face because she set her own mug down and pulled a chair over, sitting across from Megan. "Hey," she said softly, her eyes full of concern. "What's going on in that head of yours?" Megan sighed, setting her coffee aside. "I'm scared, Emma," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know we worked on the resume, and I know we have a plan, but what if it's not enough? What if I can't find something soon? I'm so tired of feeling like I'm just barely keeping my head above water." The vulnerability in her voice made Emma's heart ache. She reached across the table, her hand warm and steady over Megan's trembling fingers. "It's okay to be scared," Emma said gently. "This is a lot to handle, and it's not fair that you're going through this. But you're not alone, Megs. We'll figure it out together, one step at a time." Megan swallowed hard, fighting the wave of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. "I know I'm not alone," she said, her voice breaking. "But it feels like the world is so unforgiving. One mistake, and everything can come crashing down. And all I did was try to help someone." Emma's eyes softened even more, and she squeezed Megan's hand. "You did something good," she insisted. "The world might not always reward kindness, but that doesn't mean it wasn't worth it. People like you make the world a better place, even if it doesn't feel like it right now." Megan took a shaky breath, nodding as she tried to absorb Emma's words. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their conversation settling around them. But then, Emma straightened and gave Megan a determined look. "Okay," she said, clapping her hands together. "Let's get to work. Applications won't fill themselves out, and I've got a feeling today might surprise us." Despite the doubt still lingering in her heart, Megan couldn't help but feel a spark of hope at Emma's unwavering optimism. "All right," she agreed, mustering a small smile. "Let's do this." They sat up at the coffee table, side by side, laptops open and resumes ready. The apartment felt like a tiny war room, with the two of them battling against the overwhelming odds. Megan scrolled through job listings, her eyes narrowing as she tried to match her skills to the endless stream of requirements. Customer service positions, administrative assistant roles, even retail work. All options she would have to consider, no matter how unappealing. With each application she filled out, the fear of rejection loomed. She knew that countless others were applying for the same jobs, and the competition was fierce. But Emma's presence beside her, offering quiet encouragement and an occasional joke to lighten the mood, kept her from spiraling. Hours passed, and Megan's spirits wavered. The sheer repetition of copying and pasting information, adjusting cover letters, and submitting forms made her feel like she was throwing messages into a void, hoping for a response that might never come. The exhaustion from the emotional weight she carried compounded with each passing minute. But then, as she was about to close her laptop and give in to a wave of despair, a notification popped up. Her email pinged, and she stared at the screen, her heart pounding. It was a response from a local community center, inviting her to an interview for a position as a volunteer coordinator. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes, a mixture of disbelief and relief crashing over her. Emma leaned over, her eyes widening as she read the email. "See?" she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "I told you today might surprise us." Megan let out a shaky laugh, the tears spilling over. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to feel the hope she had been so afraid to embrace. Maybe, just maybe, things were beginning to turn around. The email invitation felt surreal, and Megan read it over and over, her disbelief refusing to fade. An interview. It wasn't a job yet, but it was a glimmer of hope she hadn't dared to expect. She looked up at Emma, whose eyes were shining with pride. "You got this, Megan," Emma said, her voice firm. "They're gonna love you. And this job, it's perfect. Volunteer coordinator? It's everything you're good at." Megan's heart thudded painfully in her chest. "What if I mess it up?" she whispered, the fear still gnawing at her. "What if I go in there, and they realize I'm not what they're looking for?" Emma rolled her eyes, but her expression remained kind. "You're the most genuine, caring person I know. That's exactly what they need. But if you're nervous, we'll prepare, okay? We'll practice every question they could possibly throw at you." Megan clung to that plan like a lifeline. She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Okay," she agreed, trying to infuse her voice with some confidence. "Let's do it." They spent the next few hours transforming their tiny living room into an interview workshop. Emma played the role of a no-nonsense interviewer, firing off questions with a mock-serious expression. "Why do you want this job?" she asked, her voice comically deep. Megan fumbled for an answer, her hands twisting nervously. I want to help people," she stammered. "I believe in making a difference, even if it's just a small one." Emma shook her head, waving her hands like a buzzer had gone off. "Nope, not confident enough," she said, her own grin softening the critique. "Try again. Remember, Megan, you have to sell yourself. Believe that you belong there. And they will too." Megan sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It's hard," she admitted. "I've spent so much time trying to just stay afloat. I don't know how to convince someone I'm worth investing in." Emma's face softened. She sat down beside Megan, her voice turning gentle. "You don't have to convince them you're perfect. Just show them who you are. That's enough." She paused, searching Megan's eyes. "You've been through hell and back, and you're still here, still fighting. That's worth more than any fancy resume bullet point." Megan let the words sink in, feeling a tear slip down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, but Emma caught her hand, squeezing it. "You are enough," Emma repeated, "and they'd be lucky to have you." Taking a deep breath, Megan tried again. "I want this job because I care about people," she said, her voice stronger this time. "I've always believed in the power of small acts of kindness, and I want to create a space where those acts can make a difference." Emma's eyes lit up, and she nodded. "Much better," she said, a smile spreading across her face. "See? You can do this." The hours slipped away as they practiced more questions, refining Megan's answers and building her confidence. By the time they finally called it a night, Megan felt a mix of exhaustion and cautious optimism. Her mind still buzzed with nerves, but she no longer felt quite so powerless. Lying in bed that night, Megan clutched the token the old man had given her, its weight familiar and grounding in her hand. She whispered a silent hope into the darkness, a plea for strength and the chance to prove herself. The morning sun would bring the interview, the moment that could set everything in motion. As she drifted into a restless sleep, Megan clung to the fragile belief that maybe, just maybe, she had a chance to rebuild the life she thought she had lost. Megan awoke before dawn, the first light creeping over the horizon, painting the walls of her small bedroom in shades of nervous anticipation. The anxiety was immediate, a heavy knot in her stomach that refused to ease. She lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling and trying to steady her breathing. "Just breathe," she whispered to herself, echoing Emma's words from the night before. The reminder helped, but only a little. She had no idea what awaited her, no guarantees that today would be the fresh start she so desperately needed. With a deep sigh, she swung her legs over the side of the bed and made her way to the bathroom. The mirror reflected her tired eyes and the tension carved into her expression. She splashed cold water onto her face, willing herself to wake up fully, to face the day head-on. There was no room for doubt now, not when this interview could change everything. Emma was already up, bustling around the kitchen. The smell of coffee and scrambled eggs filled the small apartment, and Megan felt a rush of gratitude for her friend's steady presence. "Morning," Emma greeted, her voice bright despite the early hour. "How are we feeling?" Megan managed a weak smile. Like my nerves are about to stage a mutiny, she admitted, her voice trembling. Emma shot her a look of mock seriousness, setting a plate of breakfast in front of her. Eat, she commanded. You'll need your strength. Plus, you can't ace an interview on an empty stomach. Megan picked at the food, her appetite non-existent, but she forced herself to take a few bites. The gesture was more for Emma than for herself, a silent promise that she was trying. They sat in a companionable silence, the weight of the morning hanging between them. As the clock ticked closer to her departure, Megan's nerves only grew. She dressed in the best outfit she could put together, a simple but professional ensemble Emma had helped her choose. She stood in front of the mirror, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from her blouse, trying to convince herself that she looked the part. Emma appeared behind her, resting a comforting hand on Megan's shoulder. You're going to do great, she said, her voice steady and reassuring. Megan met Emma's gaze in the mirror, drawing strength from her friend's unwavering belief in her. Thank you, Megan whispered, her throat tight with emotion. She turned, pulling Emma into a hug that was as much for her own reassurance as it was a way to express her gratitude. Emma hugged her back, holding on as if she could physically transfer some of her own strength to Megan. Finally, it was time to leave. Megan grabbed her bag, slipping the small token from the old man into her pocket. Its familiar weight gave her a fleeting sense of security, a reminder of the unexpected connections that could change everything. She stood in the doorway, taking one last look at the small, cluttered apartment that had been her safe haven through so many storms. Go get him, Tiger, Emma said, grinning and giving her a playful shove. Megan laughed, a burst of genuine warmth breaking through her nerves. She clung to that feeling as she stepped out the door and made her way into the morning light. The walk to the community center felt surreal, the city's usual hustle and bustle muted by her anxious anticipation. She clutched her bag tightly, her heart pounding in rhythm with her hurried footsteps. By the time she reached the building, her palms were sweaty, and she took a moment outside to steady herself. Megan drew in a deep breath, her fingers grazing the token in her pocket. You can do this, she told herself, the words shaky but determined. With one final push, she opened the door and stepped inside, her future hanging in the balance. The reception area was warm and welcoming, a stark contrast to the cold formality of fast food. Posters lined the walls, showcasing past community events, smiling faces, and messages of hope. A receptionist greeted her with a kind smile, and Megan's nerves eased, if only slightly. Hi, I'm Megan Clark, she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. I have an interview scheduled. The receptionist nodded, gesturing for her to take a seat. As Megan sat down, she took another calming breath, clutching the small token like a talisman of hope. No matter what happened today, she knew she had done everything she could to prepare. Now all she could do was give it her best and trust that maybe, just maybe, kindness would find its way back to her. Megan sat in the waiting area, the clock on the wall ticking with a relentless, almost mocking rhythm. Each second seemed to echo louder than the last, amplifying the pounding of her heart. She clasped her hands tightly in her lap, her fingers fidgeting despite her best efforts to appear composed. She noticed others milling about the community center, volunteers greeting one another, a group of kids laughing as they rushed past, a mother soothing a crying toddler. There was a warmth here, a sense of belonging and purpose that made her heart ache with longing. This was a place where people made a difference, where small acts mattered. It felt right. It felt like a place where she could truly be herself. Megan Clark, a voice called, breaking through her reverie. She jolted, her nerves snapping back into sharp focus. A woman stood by an open office door, her smile warm and genuine. She wore a professional outfit, but her demeanor was approachable, her eyes kind. Megan stood, her legs feeling a little unsteady, and made her way over. Yes, that's me, she managed, her voice steady despite the swirl of anxiety inside. The woman extended a hand. I'm Laura, the director here, she said. It's a pleasure to meet you. Come on in. Megan followed her into the small office, which was lined with bookshelves and decorated with photos of various community events. The room exuded a sense of welcoming that eased some of the tension in Megan's shoulders. She took a seat across from Laura, clutching her bag tightly in her lap. "Thank you for coming in today," Laura began, her tone warm and conversational. "We're really looking for someone who can bring both passion and dedication to this role. Can you tell me a bit about what drew you to the position?" Megan took a deep breath, trying to silence the doubts that whispered in her mind. She thought of Emma's encouragement, of the old man and his words about the importance of kindness. "I've always believed in the power of small acts of compassion," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I think that even the smallest gestures can have a ripple effect, changing someone's day, or even their life, in ways we can't always see." Laura's expression softened, and she nodded, encouraging Megan to continue. Buoyed by the subtle sign of approval, Megan pressed on. "I want to be part of a community that values people and supports them when they need it most. This position, it feels like a place where I could make a real impact." Laura's eyes flickered with interest, and she leaned forward. "That's a beautiful sentiment," she said. "Can you share an experience where you felt your compassion made a difference, even in a small way?" Megan's breath caught. Her mind raced back to that fateful day at fast food, to the old man's grateful eyes and the meal she had given him, despite the cost to herself. But the memory was laced with the pain of what it had cost her. Her job, her security, her sense of stability. She hesitated, her fingers curling around the small token in her pocket. The hesitation didn't go unnoticed. Laura's gaze was gentle, but perceptive, as if she could sense the struggle Megan was facing. Finally, Megan found the courage to speak. "I used to work at a fast food restaurant," she began, her voice trembling with the weight of the story she was about to tell. "One day an older man came in. He looked defeated, like he hadn't felt seen or cared for in a long time. So, I bought him a meal, even though I knew it was against company policy. He was so grateful, and for a moment, it felt like the world wasn't so harsh." Laura listened intently, her expression empathetic. Megan drew in a shaky breath, forcing herself to continue. "But my manager didn't see it that way. I was fired for breaking the rules, and it felt like everything I'd worked for had fallen apart. But even now, I don't regret it, because that small act of kindness mattered. To him and to me." A silence fell between them, thick with meaning. Megan's heart hammered in her chest, unsure of how Laura would react. Would she see Megan as a liability, someone who broke rules? Or would she understand the deeper significance of what she had done? Laura leaned back in her chair, a thoughtful look on her face. "That's a powerful story," she said softly, "and it speaks volumes about your character." Her eyes met Megan's, and there was something in her gaze, something that felt like understanding. "Here, we believe in meeting people where they are and lifting them up. Your story tells me that you already understand that." Megan's throat tightened, a surge of hope making it hard to breathe. Laura's words felt like a lifeline, a chance to finally turn things around. As the interview continued, Megan found herself speaking with more confidence. Each question a bridge she managed to cross, one step closer to a future she hadn't dared to dream of. By the time they wrapped up, Megan's hands were no longer trembling. Laura stood, extending her hand with a smile. "Thank you for coming in today, Megan. We'll be in touch soon." Megan shook her hand, the weight of the token in her pocket grounding her. "Thank you so much for this opportunity," she replied, her voice full of sincere gratitude. As she left the office, the warmth of the community center wrapped around her like a promise. For the first time in what felt like forever, Megan allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things were finally starting to change for the better. The walk home from the community center was a blur. Megan's heart was still pounding, her mind replaying every moment of the interview. She could still hear Laura's voice, still feel the warmth of the director's understanding gaze. The hope she had dared to feel clung to her, fragile but persistent, like a flame that refused to be snuffed out. But with every step closer to her apartment, the reality of the waiting game began to sink in. There was nothing more she could do now but wait and hope that her story, her passion, had been enough. The uncertainty was suffocating. What if she didn't get the job? What if she had poured her heart out only to be met with more rejection? By the time she pushed open the door to her apartment, her nerves were frayed. Emma was sitting at the table, her laptop open and a pile of paperwork spread out in front of her. At the sound of the door, she looked up, her eyes wide with anticipation. "Well?" Emma asked, her voice taut with hope. Megan leaned against the door, a mixture of exhaustion and tentative relief washing over her. "It went okay, I think," Megan replied, her voice soft. "Laura was kind, and she seemed to understand where I was coming from. But now it's just waiting." She tried to smile, but it came out wobbly. Emma's face softened, and she got up, wrapping Megan in a warm hug. "You did your best," she whispered, "and that's all you can do. No matter what happens, I'm proud of you." Megan clung to her, feeling the tight, knot in her chest loosen, just a fraction. Emma's words felt like a balm, a reminder that she wasn't facing this storm alone. As they pulled apart, Emma gestured toward the kitchen. "I made brownies," she said, a grin breaking through her worry. "They're a little burnt, but sugar makes everything better, right?" Megan laughed, a genuine sound that surprised her. "You're the best," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. She followed Emma into the kitchen, where a plate of misshapen but inviting brownies sat on the counter. They were still warm, the chocolate scent filling the small space and momentarily pushing away the fear of the unknown. They sat together, the brownies a sweet distraction, and for a little while, the world felt manageable. Emma told stories about her day, her humor a welcome distraction, and Megan let herself sink into the comfort of their shared laughter. The waiting would be hard, but at least she had Emma by her side. But as the evening wore on and the laughter faded into quiet conversation, the doubt returned, creeping in like an unwelcome guest. Megan's mind raced with worst-case scenarios, and she found herself clutching the small token from the old man, tracing the emblem's grooves with her thumb. "Do you really think things will get better?" Megan asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air, vulnerable and raw. She wasn't sure what answer she wanted: reassurance, honesty, or maybe a mix of both. Emma set her mug down, her expression thoughtful. "I think life is messy and hard," she said slowly. "But I also think that people like you make it worth it. You believe in the good, even when it costs you. And that matters." She reached over, covering Megan's hand with hers. "Things will get better, even if it doesn't feel that way right now." Megan's eyes stung, and she blinked back tears. "I hope you're right," she murmured, her voice thick. The uncertainty was still there, but Emma's unwavering belief in her was a light she could cling to. That night, as Megan lay in bed, the weight of the day pressing down on her, she whispered a silent plea to the universe. She hoped that her act of kindness hadn't been in vain, that somewhere, somehow, it would circle back to her. Clutching the token tightly, she drifted into a restless sleep, dreams filled with echoes of hope and fear. The waiting had begun, but Megan knew she had given it her all. Whatever came next, she would face it one moment at a time, holding on to the small sparks of belief that had carried her this far. Megan awoke to the dull gray light of dawn creeping through the blinds, casting shadows across her small bedroom. The unease from the previous night had not lifted. Instead, it sat heavy in her chest, a reminder of everything hanging in the balance. She rolled over, staring at the ceiling, trying to push away the fog of doubt. Today was another day of waiting, another day of uncertainty. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, startling her. She reached for it with a shaking hand, her heart pounding as she unlocked the screen. A flood of messages and emails greeted her, none of which seemed to contain the response she so desperately craved. She closed her eyes, her heart sinking, before setting the phone back down. Emma was already awake when Megan emerged from her room, her friend busy watering the small collection of plants on the windowsill. The sight was comforting, a small moment of life and care in their otherwise chaotic world. Emma turned, her face lighting up with a smile that Megan couldn't help but return, even if it was brief and tired. "Morning," Emma greeted, setting the water in the container. "I was thinking we could go for a walk together. Clear our heads a bit. It's supposed to be nice out." Megan hesitated, the the idea of stepping out into the world feeling almost impossible. But she knew that staying cooped up in the apartment, waiting for a reply that might not come today, would only make the anxiety worse. "Yeah," she said finally, forcing a smile. "That sounds good." They got ready in silence, both of them moving with the quiet understanding of two people carrying heavy loads. The streets were already coming to life as they stepped outside, the air crisp and full of the scents of morning. Megan stuffed her hands into her jacket pockets, feeling the weight of the token from the old man pressing against her palm. She rubbed her thumb over the worn image, clinging to the sense of comfort and love. The city buzzed around them, but Megan barely registered the noise. Her mind kept circling back to the interview, to Laura's kind eyes, to the way she poured her heart out and left it exposed and cold. Every moment of waiting felt like a test of her resilience, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could endure. Emma nudged her gently. "You're doing that thing again," she said with a small smile. "Well, you're here, but not really here." Megan sighed, giving her friend a rueful look. "Sorry, I'm just worried." Emma wrapped an arm around her shoulders, holding her close. "I know," she said, "but today let's try to focus on being present, even if it's just for a little while." Megan nodded, grateful for Emma's presence. They walked for a while, the tension slowly melting away into each step. The air felt lighter, and the weight on Megan's chest became ease, only slightly. They laughed about old memories, shared stories, and tried to reclaim some normalcy from chaos and past feelings. Then, just as they were passing a small coffee shop, Megan's phone buzzed again. She froze, her breath catching. Emma stopped beside her, her eyes wide in anticipation. Megan pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling as she opened the notification. Her eyes scanned the screen, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The words blurred as tears sprang to her eyes. She could make out these scenes, near-based on all her position. Megan's knees were weak, and she had to clutch Emma's arm instead. "I got it," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Come on, I got the job." Emma let out a joyful cry, throwing her arms around her and pulling her to a hug so tight that it almost hurt. They laughed and cried, standing there on the busy sidewalk, waiting to relief and joy surged through her, a wave so powerful she felt like she was breathing. "You did it," Emma said, her voice thin with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." Megan clung to her friend, the weight of the past weeks finally lifted, leaving her breathless and excited. She admitted, fighting, struggling, endless uncertainty, and had all the memories. She pulled the token from her pocket, clutching it in her hand, and silently thanking to whatever forces had taken place. As they made their way back home, the world seemed a little lighter, clearer. Megan knew that the challenge was real, that this was just the beginning of the future. But for now, she let herself revel in the power of kindness and resilience that led her to something she had fought so hard to gain. Maybe, just maybe, she was finally on the path to something better. As Megan and Emma walked home, the city around them felt transformed. It was as if the world had shifted, opening new doors to possibilities Megan had once thought unreachable. The relief and hope radiated from her, a light she hadn't felt in a long time. The journey had been grueling, full of fear, loss, and uncertainty. But this moment was proof that even in the darkest times, there was a path forward. Her story wasn't just about surviving, it was about believing that a single act of kindness could ignite change. And now, dear viewer, I want you to think about the impact one small gesture can have. Megan's journey shows us the power of persistence, compassion, and the courage to keep hoping even when the odds are stacked against us. If you've ever faced a moment where the world felt heavy, or if you've ever doubted the strength of a simple act of kindness, let this story be a reminder. Your actions matter, and your resilience can light the way for others. If this journey touched your heart, or made you reflect on your own struggles and triumphs, please share your thoughts and comments. Your story could inspire someone else, just as Megan's has inspired us. Don't forget to like this video to spread its message of hope and compassion. And if you want to join us for more stories of courage, kindness, and the human spirit's power, hit that subscribe button and become a part of our community. Share this video with someone who needs a spark of hope today. Because sometimes all it takes